Okay, you saw the lesson on electrical interactions in Miss Meyer's classroom. What did you notice? What did you wonder? Perhaps you noticed features of classroom discourse or modeling that you use regularly in your classroom. Perhaps you wondered, the room seems to include mostly fluent English speakers. Is this a good example for diverse, multilingual classrooms? As a teacher of culturally and linguistically diverse students, you are aware of the challenges faced by our emerging bilinguals. I hope that over the course of this 5 units of this e-workshop, we'll address those challenges. But before we dismiss this lesson as inappropriate for emerging bilinguals, let's describe the myriad of opportunities present. If we do nothing else for our bilingual learners, we must maintain the highest possible standards for science learning. And that means we can't neglect the challenge shown here. Whatever we do to increase access to the language of science, we can't lose the rigor of Miss Meyer's classroom. I'd like to point out 4 specific elements, opportunities that we saw in this lesson that illustrate why classrooms dominated by the practices described in the next generation science standards have such potential for your bilingual students. The first, and perhaps the most important thing we see happening when we use science and engineering practices is high cognitive challenge. In Ms. Meyer's lesson, we saw students struggle to represent the scientific concepts through pictures, then through language. Having to create models to explain involves high cognitive challenge. The teacher asked probing questions to challenge her students to think deeply about the phenomenon they observed, but did not rescue or take away from the challenge of explaining. As a science teacher, I'm especially proud that I can provide opportunities for high cognitive challenge, even for students whose English proficiency limits their ability to receive or convey information in English. The second element is non-linguistic representations. In Ms. Meyer's lesson, her ability to assess students' conceptual understanding did not depend on students' English language proficiency. This is often the case when the practice of science and engineering is central to our learning. Use models, diagrams, charts, and other non-linguistic representations, either student-created or teacher-created. It gives bilingual students access to challenging science content independent of language. Furthermore, these models or non-linguistic science representations act as a bridge to learning the academic language of science. This brings us to the third element, language in context. Even though science concepts such as static charge are abstract and challenging, in Ms. Meyer's room, both language and content is contextualized to hands-on learning, to real student experience. This is ideal for language acquisition because we know that languages aren't learned, they're acquired through use. For example, many people question whether science vocabulary terms such as Van de Graaff generator are too difficult for many bilingual students. But I have little doubt that the term Van de Graaff generator will be acquired by students engaged in this lesson. The term is discussed in context and connected to an experience. Students respond to commands, turn the Van de Graaff generator on, or questions, what happened when the Van de Graaff generator was turned on. They may read the term in lab instructions, write the term in their lab notes, speak the term along with other important vocabulary as they draw on their models, all in the context of experience. When student-centered science and engineering practices are central to the learning, the language is acquired through use. The fourth and final element I'd like to point out is collaboration. The next generation science standards put added emphasis on classrooms rich in collaboration. When students are involved in science and engineering practices, student talk dominates, and the talk is often more academic and for an authentic purpose. As students design, research, evaluate, argue, and communicate, they are languaging, using ever-expanding language abilities to express meaning in new ways. With this seemingly radical statement, supported by the literature about language learning in school, a science classroom where bilingual students are supported in communicating for an authentic purpose through high context, challenging science and engineering practices. This is a better place for the acquisition of language than a language classroom where decontextualized skill and drill dominate instruction. This is not to say that a great pull-out ELD block isn't critically important for bilinguals. It's just that the opportunity you give students to engage in science and engineering practices has the same critical importance in expanding what your students can do with language. So give yourself a pat on the back. Your great science teaching is the foundation for linguistically responsive classroom practice. Next up, choose an explore option that makes sense for you in preparation for your first Make It work. You can read more about modeling as a science and engineering practice. Choose another science and engineering practice from the next generation science standards. Or if you're already familiar with these standards, take a look at the CREED standards for effective pedagogy for diverse classrooms, with a special eye on the overlap between these two seemingly different frameworks. Thanks for participating in this workshop and all your hard work in making your classroom a great place for bilingual excellence.